For this exercise, I'm going to be showing you two different techniques for creating repeated and reflected pattern designs within Adobe Illustrator. You can use these for the back of your card, or also it looks really great for the background of any package design that we'll be using. So to get started, let's go to File and create a new document. The setup for this document is going to be twice the size of a normal card. So the width is going to be 5 inches and the height will be 7 inches. Set the number of artboards to be 6. And under the advanced options, make sure RGB color mode is selected. This will give us our best blending results. Next, click on More Settings. And this will open up the More Settings dialog box, and we want to make sure these have plenty of space between each of the artboards. Select the first option to grid by row. Set your spacing to be 2 inches, and we're going to keep our columns at 3 inches. So this will give us 3 cards in 2 different rows. When we say Create Document, this is how our document will be set up. And I'm going to be showing you two techniques. So the first technique we're going to do for the top, and the second technique we'll do for the bottom row of cards. Let's zoom in to this first card and show you how to make a basic pattern within Adobe Illustrator. So to start off, we need to have some sort of artwork to create or to work within. And for this one, I'm going to keep it very, very simple. I've got my star selected. I'm going to make a simple star in the center and show you how to make an object. Patterns can be created using just about any kind of object. However, if you use type or text, you do need to create outlines to work with those. The simplest way to make a pattern is to start off by creating your objects, and in your swatches panel, if you open it up, you can select any of your objects, drag them into the swatches, and automatically it'll save that object as a repeating pattern swatch. So if I wanted to use it, I can choose my rectangle tool, I can click and drag, and then if I choose the star pattern, there it is repeating itself over and over again within that area. That's the simplest and easiest way to create a repeating pattern. But let me show you how you can get a little bit more results from making the pattern maker. We'll keep my swatches open to the side. Let's do something a little bit more complex. Like I said, for this first one, we just want to keep it relatively simple so you can add on anything else to yours. I'm just going to do some quick little bursts. You can have things overlapping. This really is the kind of effect that you don't know what you're going to get until you play around with it. Some other things I like to do is to change up the colors, change up the overlapping, and also play around with transparency and blending modes. Whatever you want to do, I'll leave it up to you. So let's say I wanted to turn this into a repeating pattern. Scale this down just a little bit, make it smaller. First of all, I'm going to select everything, go up to the Object drop-down menu, choose Pattern, and Make. It may give you a warning dialog box saying that whatever you created is going to be saved in the swatches panel, so we're going to say OK. And when we say OK, you'll get a preview of what your repeating pattern will look like. All of the options can be found in this Pattern Options panel. Now there are some different kinds of patterns you can do, but looking at the bottom and working our way up, first off, if you want to have more copies of it, you can set it to be 7 by 7 or 9 by 9, more or less. It will dim or slightly lower the transparency of all of your copies, but if you want to see it at 100%, you can change that to here. Normally I like to keep mine a little bit low so I can tell the difference between my original artwork and the copies. And then you could start playing around with the type of patterns you're going to create. Let's give it a name. We'll call it Ben's Star. Other types of grids can offset your repeating pattern. So instead of it copying as a normal grid from the top and bottom, left and right, you can offset it like a brick. And now it's shifted it over slightly. And the amount of offset can be determined below. You can also do a hexagonal kind of offset. In this case, it'll copy it on 6 sides of your design. So far, it's looking pretty good. To take it a step further and to play around with the overlapping and how close or far away it is, click on the little icon at the top of the Pattern Options box to open up the Pattern tool, and now you'll notice you've got a bounding box that goes around whatever pattern you have. And if you click and drag around this bounding box, you can spread out your design, or you can bring it in closer and have it actually overlapping of your design. Now it's a simple matter of just kind of playing around. Of course, you get too close, it'll be way too close, but you can play around and see what results you get based on that particular effect. Once you like the style that you have, and you actually want to save it up, go to the very top of your art panel, and you can either save a copy of it, or you can hit done, and it'll go back to normal mode. With normal mode set, you can move your artwork out of the way, and then you can start to use your pattern. So I'll click and drag, and here's my pattern set in my swatches, and one thing it's set is now done. So very quickly, very easily, you can set your patterns and be able to recreate those. Let me show you one other thing that you can do within your patterns. Let me make a series of concentric circles, and I'll set mine to be red and white. So I'll copy these, make a white one inside of it. Again, select your objects that you want. Now, we do need to set it to be the actual size that you want your repeating pattern to be. If it starts off too large, then whatever you set your swatch to be, it'll be that size as well. So I've scaled mine down. I'll zoom in, go to Object, Pattern and Make. We'll say OK to that. Some of the other options to be considered happens whenever you go by a brick pattern. I've offset it by about a half. Let's turn on the controls. Now I can start to click in the center and overlap it and get this kind of effect. Notice that the ones that are on top are overlapping the ones that are below. If I wanted the ones below to overlap, I can change the overlap set to here. So now I've got that set to the top as well. And I can also change the spacing and the placement of it to give me this kind of repeated effect within my design. Again, we can say done, or we can save a copy of it, and once it's selected, we can fill it in and start to use it within whatever shape that we have. The final thing to note about using these particular patterns has to do with changing the size of whatever object that it's placed in. If I move it around, the objects in this case are moving with me, and if I go to scale my object by clicking on the outer edge and move down, notice that the pattern also scales as well. But if I was to resize it, now it's starting to kind of get off and get way too distorted. Instead, even if I tried to rotate it, even the pattern rotates. Instead, if you want to make a transformation, but you don't want to have the pattern to be transformed, find your Scale tool, which looks like this in your toolbox. Double click on it. This will open up the Scale options. Make sure Transform Pattern is unchecked. With Transform Pattern unchecked, when you go to select your object and change it, notice now I can change the shape and even the rotation of my object, but the pattern does not remain affected. So if this is what you want to be able to do, you either need to uncheck, or if I do need to rotate and change things, I may want to check on Transform Pattern, and this will allow me to retransform my pattern from here. So what I want you to do within this first artboard is to just play around and create some simple patterns using simple shapes. Define those patterns, save them to your swatches. Within the second pattern, I want you to play around with different color blending modes and also your opacity. So to change up your blending modes and opacity, you may want to open the transparency panel. And when you start to do things like this, like I'll create some simple rectangles and we'll fill them in with a solid color. The opacity changes will allow your different objects to overlap and you can see what they look like. So if I set one of these to be multiplied, if I drop the opacity of another one, again I'm using my transparency panel to change these up. We'll set that, maybe that one to be, let's do overlay for that. Now when I define this as a pattern, again, go into Object, Pattern, and Make, and they start to overlap. This will give me some unique results within theirs. Now it kind of gives me this tartan kind of look. Again, you play around and get the effect that you wish to achieve from those. In the final third artboard, I want you to create a repeating pattern that uses some sort of linear or line style. So how would you do a wavy line, or how would you do multiple horizontal or diagonal lines within this one? Again, playing around, defining it, and then saving it up as a color swatch. For the next one, let's go down to our second row. This is going to give us the ability to create a repeated pattern. If you look at cards, you'll notice that they'll have a design that's reflected both on the horizontal axis and also on the vertical axis. Now there's several different ways you can do this in Illustrator. The kind of technique I'm going to show you will allow for a live preview of whatever you draw to automatically show up within your card. Now to do this within our exercise, go to your Layers panel. Let's create a new layer and lock down the other layers. So I only want to be working in layer 2. The first thing I need to do is to drag on some guides. So I'm going to turn on my rulers. We'll do one vertical ruler roughly at the center, and I'll do a horizontal rule towards the center is here. I've purposely put them off. If you ever want to automatically align something centered, you can go to View, down to your guides, and make sure you unlock your guides. With Unlock Guides, you can select both of your guides, and up here at the top are your alignment options. If you choose to align to the artboard, you can center them automatically up here. So there I get a perfect center alignment with this one. This will act as great guides to tell where our different quadrants are going to be. The next thing we need to do, let's grab our rectangle tool and set our fill color and our stroke color to be none. So we don't want to have any fill or stroke, and we just want to be able to create a rectangle inside of our artboard boundaries. Again, if you need to center this up, you can go up to the very top, make sure Align to Artboard is selected, and then you can center vertically and horizontally that alignment. So here's where the magic trick happens. We need to go to our Layers panel, and if we expand it, you can see all of the different things within that layer. Clicking on this topmost icon on the right will select everything within this dialog box. With everything on this layer now selected, we can go to Effect, down to Transform, and let's turn on a Transform effect. Within Transform, this allows us to take whatever we draw and automatically do a transformation of it. The kind of transformation we want to do is we want to reflect it across the x-axis. In other words, we want to reflect it left and right. We also want to turn on Scale and Stroke effects and make sure Transform Objects and Patterns is selected. Do make sure your center alignment mark is selected for your reference point, and turn on Copies to be 1. When we say OK, here's what's happening. If I go and I grab my brush or let's do my paintbrush tool, we'll do blob brush. Since I'm reflecting everything on my x-axis, whatever I paint with one automatically shows up on the other, which is pretty cool. This makes it very easy to reflect my patterns back and forth across this. Now if I want to reflect both this side and top and bottom, let's get rid of what I have, we need to do the transformation one more time. So go back to Layer 2 and click on this top rightmost icon. This will select everything that's there. Go back up to Effect, Distort and Transform, and choose Transform again. Now this may give you a warning. We're going to apply a new effect. And in this case, we want to reflect it across the y-axis. Make sure again that you have one copy selected and that you've got the center reference point selected for here. When we say OK, now whatever I draw is going to be reflected on both axes, which is pretty cool. So, to begin, if I don't want to change up any of my guides or my reference points, I'm going to go ahead and lock down my rectangles and my guides, and now I can work directly from here. I want you to practice and play around creating a design that has a reflected means within this pattern. You can use your pen tool and start drawing off individual shapes. We do need to, of course, give it a fill color. Draw off individual shapes and objects. You can work within line mode, and sometimes that'll give you some interesting results. And give yourself a reflected pattern to work with for here. If you want to do some research on something, looking up different tribal patterns or even typing out some tribal dingbats tends to give you some really good results. You can use your shapes. Let's do one across here. There's that. There's that one for this one. Anyway, I'm just playing around, but this is the basic setup. Create a simple pattern that fills in this particular area. You can do the same thing for the other two artboards as well. If you do another artboard, make sure you lock down layer 2 and then create another layer for the third artboard and the fourth artboard. That's, or excuse me, the second and third artboard. In other words, create a new layer and repeat these same processes over and over again. Some final things to remember when working with this particular technique is when you go to transform, you can play around with the angle of rotation, and this will give you some different kinds of effects as well. And you can play around with expanding your objects. If I was to start drawing from here, let's grab my blob brush again. So whatever I draw off and create, it's automatically copying. If I was to use my selection tools, I can select my original drawings, but what I can't select is what's being copied. This is because Illustrator is creating kind of a appearance of this, and it's not actually rendering the vector outlines. It's only rendering my original vectors. If I do want to select these and change up the color of them and be able to move them around, what I need to do is to select my original artwork. We can go up to Object, and if you can't see Expand Appearance, here's what's happening. Let's go back to layer 2 and let's unlock everything on this layer. Now let's try it again. So I'm going to select everything that's on this layer, go up to Object and Expand Appearance. When you expand the appearance, now notice that everything is nice and selected, and I can move it around. It is grouped automatically, so I'm going to ungroup, and now I can select individual parts and move those around as well too. So expanding it, once it's expanded, I can't redo the transformation. I would have to redo it again, but simply play around and create your multiple different alignments with that. Once you're finished, save up everything as an Illustrator file, and that's what you'll upload to Moodle for this exercise.